Hello, everyone, and welcome to Afternoon at the Museum. IRA presents the Tuskegee Airmen National Site, and this is the virtual exhibit. I'm Janine Stanley, and I am your IRA Explorer Community Manager. I'm joined in the background today, running all of our technical equipment, is Mr. Ryan Bishop. Thank you, Ryan.
Hello, everyone, and I'm so excited for today.
Yeah, this is going to be a great one today. We also have our host, Stephanie Watts. Hello, Stephanie.
Hello, Janine and Ryan.
And
How
we
are
are
you both?
joined today by Agent Wendell Hennessy.
Hi,
Hello,
Wendell.
Wendell.
Hi, everybody.
Many people know Wendell. Now, I'm just going to give a few seconds here of intro. Our Afternoon at the Museum project is one that we are sponsoring based on our outreach and awareness to increase participation within the IRA community, but also to help people become aware of the Black Lives Matter movement, of all of the things that we are facing now through the museum experience. And these are the museums in the Association of African American Museums, and you can find them at blackmuseums, plural.org. And through the end of 2020, IRA Explorers can actually review this content with our agents free, and we are making that available. And today, you're going to find out just what it's like to do this free with an agent. Now, the Tuskegee Airmen Museum is not part of that particular offer. This specific museum is part of the National Park System. But we chose it today, of all days, because of course today is September 11th. And we're marking the 19th anniversary of the attacks on the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and the other plane that also went down in Pennsylvania on that fateful day. And we hope that everyone will take some time today to remember. But what we really wanted to focus on today was bravery and patriotism in the face of just what would seem to be unsurmountable odds. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie and Wendell and Afternoon at the Museum.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again to the IRA team, Janine, Ryan, and of course, Wendell, Agent Wendell. Um, I am an IRA Explorer. I use the service, and of course, that's how I got an opportunity to do this. And so, what I would like to uh, give you is I think of it as a view through my eyes as my eyes are through Wendell. And so, in choosing this particular museum, we're going to proceed as though I had placed a call to IRA through the IRA app on my phone, and Wendell, as the agent, has answered the call. And so I will begin by walking through, and again, greeting you, Wendell. Thank you so much for being here today. Um, I I know we have a couple hangers. I have just a little snippet of knowledge about the Tuskegee Airmen Museum, um, but maybe we could just start with you giving me something of an overview so we can really determine how best to proceed.
Absolutely. Well, you are in luck because this is one of my favorite subjects. So we're going to start basically with the location. Moton Field was actually where the Tuskegee Airmen did their initial training. This was only one of two places they trained. They trained in Moton Field here, just north of Tuskegee. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for those who might be sighted joining us.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
and I'm sure we have many because we are on YouTube
Yep.
streaming live.
So what I'm showing now is an image from the hills there in Alabama, and this shows the site of Moton Field, which is where they did their initial training. It consists of two hangars, a couple of outbuildings, and then a small control tower on hangar number 2. Now, these hangars for those who aren't familiar, they're very large structures. They're put them together and they'd be the size of a Walmart supercenter. Couple of stories high, 1.5 stories high on one of the hangars, 2 stories high on the other one. Very high ceilings with a lot of open ductwork, because this is where they park the planes. So you have to have a lot of room there. And if you were wandering around in there, you'd actually hear your own footfalls and echoes. You know, there's a lot of sound issues there. But so right now we're looking at a view from the air, showing these 2 hangars. The one on the far left is hangar 1 with the control tower in the background, and the control tower is only about 3 stories high. Now I could go in there and show you photographs of that, but there aren't any because wasps live there. So we don't have any photographs there. They've actually cordoned that off. So hangar 1 is where they started. And so that's where we're going to start with part of this virtual tour. That's where I've got a lot of the, now this photograph I'm going to share right now.
So just to be clear, I'm inside hangar 1 and I'm standing facing, I'm assuming, a wall full of photos of all types, the way we would at literally if we were physically there. So is that correct, Wendell? I'm just
almost actually. I've got you outside of hangar 1 right now.
Oh, okay.
Because this is I wanted to give you a picture, because they've one of the things they've done that's kind of noteworthy is that this is a low brick building, but there is a vintage Gulf oil sign next to it on a rusted metal pole, and there's weathered benches that go along the sidewalk and well-trimmed hedges, because they've gone to great lengths to preserve a lot of the vintage materials. And so this is an old Gulf oil sign. It's a circle, an orange circle with then a white label across it, and then in blue letters it says Gulf. And the sign is weathered, and the pole that it is on is visibly rusted.
Okay.
So they're definitely giving visitors a feel of what it's like to step in.
So this might place us back, say, 1940s?
Yeah, it would be. They were in operation between 1941 and 1946, I believe. And in that time, they taught over 1,500 airmen, and there were many, many more people who were staff, ground crew, instructors, cooks, maintenance, you know, everything you'd want. So now let's get you inside. Just
moving so easily.
Yeah.
So if I were wearing heels, it wouldn't hurt to walk.
But you would hear it. You would definitely hear it.
But you really would hear your footfall. That's amazing. And for the viewers and listeners, this part where we have some silence, to me, is also a part of the IRA experience, because we would kind of be standing in, well, I would be standing in awe of the just the history of this building and what it means. And so those silences give us a chance to kind of absorb it all.
Now, when you step into the hangar itself, your very first view is, as you said, there's going to be a lot of displays. And so this one is the first display in hangar 1. It has a vintage desk with polished wood and a very old style black phone in the center of the desk. And there's a purpose for that phone. I'll get to that in a moment. But then behind there, there's one of those displays that has photographs and writing on it. And so I'm going to zoom in here just a little bit. This display starts with some of the basics about what the Tuskegee Airmen experience was all about. This section talks about the cadets, and it talks about some of the training they got. This is divided into 6 panels. 2 of them are blank, so I won't go into those. But the first panel, the printed legend on it says, "Know your allies." And then it says aviation cadets had to understand the broader context of the war, including nations involved in the worldwide conflict. Great Britain, the USSR, and the United States after Pearl Harbor, known as the Big Three, along with France and China, were the principal allied powers fighting Germany and the other Axis powers. Throughout the war, dozens of other nations joined the Allies. Among them were Australia, Belgium, Brazil, Canada, Denmark, Greece, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Poland, South Africa, and Yugoslavia.
Wow. Okay.
Now, the next panel is titled Combat Intelligence. There is a picture here that does show Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Davis. He was the leader of the Tuskegee Airmen, both in stateside and when they went into the European theater. And so this details the information about the 99th Fighter Squadron, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. They boarded the SS Mariposa in New York in April of 1943, bound for North Africa. Its first assignment was to the 12th Air Force in the Mediterranean Theater, one of 10 United States Army Air Forces in several theaters of war. Now, intelligence was more than cadet preparation. It was a matter of life and death. At Moton Field, the intelligence officer posted on the honor board to record the combat accomplishments of Tuskegee's 1st Fighter Squadron. The 99th was also the first U.S. combat unit made up entirely of African Americans, pilots, support staff, and officers. Now, below that is a picture of the Tuskegee Airmen. There are 6 of them, 5 of them sitting at a table, and another one is standing up and pointing to a map of the European theater. All the ones sitting there, 3 of them at the table, or the 2 are standing. They're all in full flight gear, including the leather skull caps, which fits very tightly on the head, and then goggles going across the forehead portion of the skull cap. So these gentlemen are ready to get into the aircraft. Now, behind that desk and that phone, which I mentioned before, this is a placard, and it has 4 photographs of some of the Tuskegee Airmen. And this is something I wish we could take part in. This is a deep red placard, and the writing on it says, "Former cadets speak." At Moton Field, cadets learn the importance of good intelligence briefings about the enemy, about their allies, and about the theater of war. This theoretical information grew more immediate when they heard the reports of experienced combat pilots. When they entered combat themselves, they learned that their lives could depend on good briefings. Please pick up the phone to hear these voices. For an overview and sampling of voices, you press 0. To hear individuals, press the number corresponding with their name.
Okay. Well, just for effect, can I hear some of the names of the gentlemen?
Sure, let me just zoom in a little bit. I'm afraid the picture on that is not clear enough to get the names of the ones.
Okay. And we'll get names.
Not this time, but I do have some other ones.
Okay.
There's always an opportunity. Now we're going to get to one of my favorite parts here. We get to talk about the actual planes that are in there.
I love the
because
planes.
there are 3 planes, or actually 2 planes and 1 training mock-up. There we go. Now the first one. Okay, the first one they used. Now the planes they used were very small and not nearly as powerful as the actual warplanes. The first one they used was the Sturman PT-17 biplane. These were actually used as in World War I, and they're crop dusters in a lot of regions. Now it's called a biplane because it has 2 fixed wings on it. It has the 2 fixed wings, which are held up to the fuselage of the airplane, the main body, by struts. And then it has fixed wheels. So those are rigid. They don't fold up into the body or anything. They stay down. The two wheels are in front of the main wings, which are over the pilot's opening there on the fuselage. Now, this isn't round. It's actually faceted. If you put a bunch of boards together and put them in a circle and then felt all the way around it, that's what that structure would feel like. And it has very tight airplane fabric stretched across it. the body of the plane, including the struts and the wheel supports, is royal blue, and then the wings are kind of golden yellow, with the U.S. Army Corps symbol on the bottom as it goes across the bottom of the wings. Now the engine, this is, I can't remember, I think it's a Continental engine. It only has 7 cylinders, and they are in a radial pattern, which means they go around where the propeller base is. Like in a car, you have an inline set of cylinders, but in this airplane, the cylinders around the engine housing actually go in a big circle, and they're large, chunky cylinders, kind of like a lowercase y, because they're attached all the way around. And it has a single propeller. And the thing that's interesting about this is that this engine only had about 200 horsepower, which is about the same as an SUV.
Well, I was going to say 7 cylinders doesn't sound like a lot for
right. You're right. And so it's only about the same horsepower as an SUV. And the top speed was only about 124, 125 miles an hour, which a lot of sports cars can exceed.
Right. And
So
how many people could fit in this particular plane? Was it only?
This is a 2-person plane. This was designed as the primary trainer. The front compartment was for the learner, the cadet. And the rear compartment was for the instructor, and they had identical controls, kind of like driver's ed, in each one. So if the cadet wasn't doing so well, the instructor could take over from the rear. And this in itself, honestly, it's only about, I don't think it's even as long as a stretch limo. It is quite small. Very compact. And so this is what they trained in. Now, they were required as part of their training to be able to fly short hops solo. And then eventually, before they could graduate, they had to fly cross country solo in this plane.
In that plane?
Yes, in that trainer plane. So that involved a lot of stops. And long, because they were running missions, into the Mediterranean and Europe, and it was pretty grueling. So they had to be ready for that.
Oh yeah.
Now the second plane that they used is actually similar models are still in use today. The other plane is a Piper Cub, which is approximately the same size as the Sturman. However, this is all enclosed. It doesn't have the open cockpits like the biplane has. It's completely closed in and has one fixed wing going across the cockpit area. Now, this one is painted bumblebee yellow. It is a very bright golden yellow, with a single black lightning bolt going from, and this has the covered engine cowl rather than open like the biplane did. And this has a long lightning bolt that starts at the front of the plane, just behind the engine, all the way to the back. And this one was used for a lot of takeoff and landing practice. It's, again, approximately the same size. These were much smaller and much slower aircraft than they were going to be using. But they had to get their certifications here. When they got the certification here, then they moved on to Tuskegee Army Airfield, which was just down the road, which was a much larger facility. And it was also segregated. And so they were running into difficult conditions even during training.
Yeah. Which has an extra dimension to training when your trainers might have issues with you.
No doubt about that. That is definitely one of the struggles. They were getting set to fight Adolf Hitler, and they still had to fight Jim Crow. Because Jim Crow laws were still fully in effect, in the U.S. Okay, so also inside the hangar, of note, hang on, I'm just going to share this new view now. Okay.
So we've turned our
There we go.
gaze to the new view.
Okay, now we are looking at another part of the inside of the building. Now, remember I mentioned that these were very big buildings and even, 2 stories within. One of the unique things about a hangar is a lot of times there is a separate maintenance building inside of the hangar itself, about the size of a single wide trailer.
Hmm.
And this has one of those buildings that would have some of the offices inside, just on one side of the building, held up with supports so that people could walk in and out under it. But attached to the building and hanging off the rafters are parachutes. There is a line of 4 parachutes, because this is also where they prepped and folded the parachutes, or as they called it, rigged it. And so hanging from the beams in the ceiling are 3 parachutes that they are easily 20 feet long and with another 30 feet of cord. And so those are hanging down from the ceiling and attaching themselves to the sides of the building, because this is where they set up the other materials. And I remember reading about one of them, and basically they used their chutes as a seat cushion.
Makes sense. And what color are these chutes?
Oh, these are white.
Mhm.
These are basically your basic white. I think at that time they were still using silk, which was the phrase "hitting the silk," meaning you're jumping out.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will just say I'm not going to leave a perfectly good functioning airplane, but for those who might want to, okay. And obviously this was what their job was. So
this was definitely, it was my policy. Now, a couple of other things. One of the other things that's interesting about Hangar 1 is that they had their own. Let me find it. There we go. They had their own little cafe.
Okay.
Which they called the tea room. And the tea room was built like a small diner. This photograph I have of the tea room right now, there are glass panels. Basically, it's one of those things where you can step in and the glass panels will be around you. So you're not going to wander around inside the display itself. And then on the counter, we'll start with, we've got a counter in the foreground. And on that counter, the thing that stands out the most in the center front of the counter is a glass dome dish with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 iced donuts. In there. Now I know this museum was open sometime in the 80s. I don't think we'd want to risk that. Now next to that is a candy display with Baby Ruth and Payday candy bars. And let's zoom in just a little bit here. And 3 Musketeers. Okay. Now these are all candy bars that were available during that time period, and they have the printing on it isn't nearly as colorful or complicated. They're all pretty simple, and those are in a glass case. And then what looks like sticks of chewing gum. I can't make out the labels on these, but it sticks of chewing gum in a small cardboard box in between those boxes of candy. Then there's also a plant. Broadleafed plant in a terracotta pot on top of the candy display. And then the rest of this area, they've got of course, it's an old style refrigerator from around the 40s, simple white with, 1 single door on it and a large fan on top of that. And then going over to the left, there's an old style Coca-Cola machine where it's just like like a chest freezer, and the 2 doors that open up from there. And then next to that is a replica of one of the dining room tables, and it's got the old white ceramic mugs, the chrome napkin holder, and it looks like another one of the donuts. I guess there are donuts everywhere here. Another one of the donuts on a small plate on that table. And one single chair beside that. And above the table on the wall is a war bonds poster.
Oh, okay.
And the one thing is, it says "Save freedom of speech, buy war bonds," and the picture is from an old Norman Rockwell painting that shows a gentleman standing up in the middle of what looks like a community meeting, and he's probably a farmer. It looks like he's wearing a canvas jacket over a plaid shirt, and he's got a note in his pocket. It looks like those might have been the notes that he was going to take, or the agenda. And so this was all about him standing up and speaking in a public meeting.
So again, save freedom of speech.
Right.
War bonds. Well, that's a
Phrase we can maybe capture today. Yeah. So this gives me some idea of just their accommodations. I mean, this is just their lounge or cafe where they could go and have a bite to eat and chat and enjoy some snack and whatever.
That's right. Now, one of the interesting things about that is that it was only accessible from the outside. There was no entrance from the hangar directly into there. So they actually had to go outside.
Okay.
Now,
Interesting.
Hangar 2
Okay.
is where I get to have a lot of fun, because this has some of my favorite things to talk about. And one of those is that when you go into Hangar 2, the very first thing that strikes everyone is there is a life-size replica of a P-51 Mustang fighter jet.
I know there's someone on the call that loves the P-51 Mustang.
And well, he's in good company. And this is actually suspended from the ceiling, pointing towards the entrance. There is a lot of blue lighting, a lot of blue and white lighting that really gives the effect of flying through a deep blue sky with maybe a few patches of white clouds. And it's suspended from the ceiling, and it's canted just slightly. In this view, it would be slightly to the left. So it looks like it's banking or making a turn. Now, this has been fully restored, and it has the standard metal fuselage, rather, for most of it. The nose cone is painted red, and there are 4 propellers, or actually it's 2, one crossed over the other one, on coming through the nose cone there. A single black stripe going from the top of the nose cone to the windshield of the cockpit. Then all the way at the back, and this is the thing that people noticed, the tail section is painted red.
The red tails.
Right, hence that name, the red tails. It is now in this picture. There's a little bit of foreshortening. It was about, honestly, the planes were about the size of a city bus. They were quite large, both in length and in width. The width, the wings are pretty much as long as the plane itself, and swept back just a little bit. These P-51s, as Janine can tell you, they were devastating fighters. But this display is one of my favorite because it goes into some of the best aspects. Now, behind, let me see if I can find one of the other photos that gives a little bit better picture, because this whole display is focused. The main part is this plane, and behind it, there's a sky blue backdrop, which has some clouds painted on it. But I want to make sure there's one that's really quite. This is a little bit better one. This is called "Becoming the Red Tails," is the legend in red script. And
so
there we go.
It's painted on one of the clouds.
Right. Actually, it's painted across this cloudscape behind the plane. Now, the fun part about this is that on that cloudscape, there are 2 planes painted. There is a German Messerschmitt fighter, and pursuing it is one of the red tails, about to give that plane a very hard time. Now, there is a single quote on a placard on that sky blue backdrop with showing a bit of a dogfight there, and this says, the quote says, "This is your opportunity. You will stay with those bombers." And that was a quote from Lieutenant Colonel Davis, who was the leader of that fighter group.
Okay.
And so this, as you know, as we talked about a little bit, this was their mission, was to protect those bombers. And they did an exceptional job of protecting those bombers. Now, next to that display, let's see here.
So we move away from that first plane.
Right, just beside the plane, there's a lot of things going on actually right in the vicinity of the plane.
Oh, okay.
And so next to it is a small, it's sort of like a diorama. It looks like a giant, a large model. Say it's about 3.5 feet by 2 feet wide. And it has small replicas of those P-51 Mustangs, and it's all one color. They're all kind of charcoal gray. And this is a replica of one of the forward air bases where they would camp out and launch these escort missions from. So it shows a couple of P-51 replicas, maybe about, I'd say, 8 inches long each, and then a couple of tents where they would live and eat, and looks like some supplies, some gas cans, a Jeep. And so this is basically showing the conditions they worked in when they were in the theater.
Okay. Pretty sparse, pretty meager.
Right.
But I mean, it is the theater, war theater, so it's not going to be anything more than that.
And they were definitely in the thick of it. There we go. Okay, now one of the displays within that area around the plane also goes deeply into what they called the double V, which means they were fighting for victory at home and abroad. As we said, they weren't, they were facing two enemies. So there's a quote here. The photographs are, one photograph on the far left shows the airmen consulting a map. In front of that looks like that's one of the bombers behind them. And there are 4 of them. And of course, all these photos are in black and white. But the caption says, Tuskegee Army Airfield was designated as an African-American base within the Army Air Forces. When the Tuskegee Airmen were stationed at bases with white units, they had segregated housing, eating, and recreational facilities. And in many instances, the facilities they had at different bases were actually worse conditions than the German prisoners of war had. And a quote here. I'm sorry?
I was going to say, so we're fighting for freedom, but we're not really free. So,
right, that is absolutely true. One of the quotes here on next to the photograph says, "The world will come to an end if we let these Negro officers have this dance with white females in attendance. So we were secretly herded on a train with the windows blacked out." And that is a quote from Master Sergeant Shade Lee. He was communications chief and inspector. This is what they had to deal with. Not just the presence of Jim Crow, but active enforcement of Jim Crow laws and segregation.
While they're in the theater.
Right. When a lot of them returned, they attempted to get into, and this was supposed to be an officers club that was going to be built for them. Those funds went somewhere else, so they tried to enter the White Officers Club. They were officers. They were war heroes. And they were not allowed to do that. They staged a protest, and they were court-martialed because of it.
Oh, court-martialed.
Court-martialed. Over 100 of them. Now, most of those charges were dropped. There were, I think, 3 of them who had remaining charges. And in... just the last decade, those charges were dropped and all the records were expunged.
Okay, so we're talking 60, 70 years later.
Exactly. And once again, justice delayed.
Mhm. Yeah.
Now, the photograph from on the right-hand side shows one of the communication. It shows two communications technicians actually
Mhm.
in front of a bank of radios. And of course, these are their older radios, so lots of plugs and lots of wires coming out of the faces of it. They're both wearing pretty small headphones, and the one in the foreground definitely looks like he's transcribing.
Mhm. It's a lot to absorb in the context of the war that they fought, were considered heroes abroad, and came home to segregation, protested not being able to get into an officers club when they were officers, and took well over 50 years to have records expunged. And this is a part of our history that I didn't get in my learning of history. And maybe some folks out listening and watching did, but this is history. This is American history too.
Absolutely. And one thing I'd like to bring up now, there's a display on the wall that shows some of the airmen, and it shows just some of the basics
Mhm.
about this. For example, the Tuskegee Airmen flew over 1,500 missions. 72 pilots were shot down. Those are enemy pilots.
Mhm.
Or they're 72 airmen, rather, shot down 112 enemy aircraft.
Mhm.
66 of the Tuskegee Airmen were killed in action.
Mhm.
32 were taken as prisoners, and even today, 13 of them are still listed as missing in action. Now, this team, and this is a pretty interesting list here. I'm just going to go over. There is a display that I don't have any static photos of, but I was able to catch a couple of grainy clips on YouTube. The medals that the Tuskegee Airmen earned during the war: 1 Legion of Merit, 1 Silver Star, 2 Soldiers medals, 59 Purple Heart medals. So 59 of them were wounded in combat. 95 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 14 Bronze Stars for valor, 774 Air Medals with clusters, and 5 Distinguished Unit Citations.
Mhm.
Now, the best part about that to me is that in 2005, the airmen were collectively awarded a Congressional Gold Medal. Now, that's a pretty important honor because the very first one actually went to George Washington.
Oh, okay. So that puts that into context.
Yeah, and actually I found a photo of that because it was custom.
Mhm. So our guests are able to see that photo.
They will as soon as I share it. There we go. Now this is a photo of the medal that was awarded to the Tuskegee Airmen en masse. It's in the Smithsonian.
Mhm.
And it is gold, of course. And the legend at the top says Tuskegee Airmen, and it shows 3 of the Tuskegee Airmen. They're they're in profile, and they're overlapping each other. But they're so you can still make out all the features. The one in the very background is an officer. He's wearing an officer's cap. It's got the rigid bill and then the peaked front that is up a little higher. The
Mhm.
next one is a maintenance man. He's got one of the small ball caps with the bill flipped up a little bit, and then the
Mhm.
one in the foreground is one of the pilots, and he is wearing that pilot's skull cap with the goggles and the spaces for the headphones that would fit in under the cap. On either side of him, on the left-hand side, it says 1941. On the right-hand side, it says 1949.
Mhm.
Which the reason they use 1949 is because until 1948. the military was still segregated.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until an executive order in 1948, which then took effect in 1949, when they were able to integrate with other units.
So just for perspective, we integrated baseball before we integrated the military.
That's correct. Although, as you know, Black people have been part of the United States military since the Revolution.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know, in every single conflict.
Yes.
And yet this is when they were finally recognized in this fashion. And even then,
Still
you know,
strong.
right.
Mhm. Is there any part of the display window that shares the names? And I think you said there's 1,500 or a lot, but I'm just curious if we could hear some names.
I can definitely, even though the museum itself doesn't have clear enough pictures of that, but I can find them thanks to Google.
Mhm. Well, this is, again, one of the benefits of touring this museum virtually with Ira, that if I were on site or virtual as we are today, you ask the agent for something like that, and you get an opportunity to have the agent Google it to add to the experience of touring the museum.
Just going to pop in, Stephanie and Wendell, to ask you if any of these gentlemen are still alive, and I wonder if there are any women that actually worked
Mhm.
at the.
Oh, there were.
Area.
Yeah.
There were definitely women who worked at Moton Field. And as some of them even were gate guards. Some of them were trainers on how to fold and pack the parachutes.
Because that had to be an art, like folding a map in the 60s, the big maps that
Right.
we were dealing with pre-Google map, Apple map. Yeah. And I don't recall if there are any alive at this point. I think one passed away here locally fairly recently, maybe within the last few years. But I don't know.
I actually had the honor of meeting that gentleman at an air show,
Yeah.
actually, and I wish I could remember his name. It's not coming to me, but
Yeah.
but I do recall meeting him at an air show in 2007. When
Right,
they
and we
had-
refer to them as the Tuskegee Airmen, and again, knowing that there are many of them, I always, since I've been interested in this, have wondered, well, what are their names? And so just a few names would be good to know.
Okay, I do have a few names here pulled from a list on the Smithsonian.
Mm-hmm.
Out of high-end interest, I had to look this up now, and I found out that it says that the Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated said that there's no way to tell how many of them are still alive, but they can say that as of May of 2019, there was still 12 of the 355 single-engine pilots still alive.
Ooh. And that's 2019. Thank you, Ryan.
I mean, believe me, like I said, this is a rabbit hole I am glad to go down because there's so many things that most people just don't know about.
Don't know.
That one of the things, and I did find these names, and so I'll go down that rabbit hole in a minute with you. But first of all, the biggest name they talk about is Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Davis Jr., who was the leader. He was the son of an Army general, and he was a graduate of West Point. He was a member of the first class of cadets to earn their wings. So that's where he got his flight training. And because of his history, because of his qualifications, he was selected to lead the 99th Pursuit Squadron, which was the very first all-black unit. Then he led the 332nd Fighter Group in Europe. Now, this is where the Red Tails got their legend.
Yes.
One of the things, and I'm going to go off book here, but one of the things is that the legend of the Red Tails is that in over 200 missions, they never lost a bomber. Now, it's not quite true. Not quite true. 5 did not make it out of 205 missions.
Mm.
No other escort group ever came even close to that number.
Wow.
And the Red Tails were known as ferocious fighters who flew incredibly tight formations. As a matter of fact, their numbers for downing enemy planes were actually slightly lower than other escort groups, because enemy planes, the Germans would not want to engage them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They didn't want to take that chance because they knew that if you took on the Red Tails, you probably weren't going home.
Right.
And they avoided those bombers that were protected. So their numbers were staggering when it came to their success.
Yeah. That's amazing for people who were thought to not have the intellect to do this, and finally given an opportunity, they excelled. Their courage and bravery is exemplary.
So it does finish up about Colonel Davis that after the war, he continued his military career in the newly independent and integrated U.S. Air Force. Finally, I have some relevance here.
A lot of Air Force people in my family too.
That's right. Air Force vet myself here. It's now he achieved the rank of Lieutenant General, and he was still a key leader in the Korean and Vietnam conflicts.
Okay.
Then the next photo they have is of a gentleman named Linkwood Williams, a civilian flight instructor at Tuskegee Army Field in World War II, and it shows him in front of one of the trainer planes. He's in full pilot gear, but he's definitely standing in front of the Sturman biplanes.
Mm-hmm.
Next name that they note is Lieutenant Lee Archer.
Mm-hmm.
He was a native of New York City. Became one of the most proficient pilots in the 332nd, being highly regarded for his skill, aggressiveness, and gallantry in air combat. And then finally, Charles Hall. He was from Brazil, Indiana. One of the things that the Airmen came from all over the country.
Yes.
He downed an FW-190 while on an escort mission on July 21st, 1943. This marked the first air victory for the United States by a black airman in the European theater. Now, one of the things that is quite unusual about their victories in the theater, and let me just find the right note here, is that 2 of them managed to to sink a German destroyer, a ship, from the air, strafing it with 50 caliber machine guns. And that was done in a harbor in Italy.
Okay. So from the sound of it, that's not something that was done often and easily done at all. Yeah.
No, it is just one more accomplishment.
Yeah.
That they had, and again, there. Let me see. There's one more quote that I found that. Yes. Okay, and this is from one of the pilots. The quote is, "They said we didn't have the intelligence, the demeanor, the courage to be combat pilots. They learned different. All we needed was a chance and training." And that person was Charles McGee. He was a pilot, and that quote was from 2005.
Well said, Mr. McGee.
That is one thing, is that, throughout all of this, you know, they're bearing in the theater of war, and then they're bearing coming back and fighting Jim Crow. They still maintain their dignity and their decorum.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know, let's face it, being better than the people they were fighting
Mm-hmm.
was.
And both sides of the ocean. The again, the experience of going through this with you, Wendell, it's breathtaking to absorb all of the information. My imagination is just all over the place with the descriptions that you've provided, and also just absorbing just the information on their treatment. And a good takeaway though from it is with the African American Museum promotion, so many of us through this experience and other experiences individuals will have on their own can learn and hopefully help affect change, positive change, especially in these times where we're challenged on all sides by a myriad of things. And so I know this is scratching the surface of their experience. As we talked about offline, the experience that happened to them aside from their military heroism. That could be a whole other 6 shows in its own.
Oh yes, that would, like I said, we could easily. I know we're pressed for time here, just for our own limitations, but easily we could do 3 hours. And as I said, this is one of my favorite subjects, just because, not only because I have that tentative connection through the U.S. Air Force, because these were our forefathers in in that branch, but just how they performed under those adverse conditions, and how they didn't just rise to the challenge, they met it and exceeded all those expectations and outperformed their contemporaries.
Yeah.
And by the way, all the tests, everything they went through were exactly the same as the white airmen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Nothing was changed.
Yeah, their tests weren't any different, and yet they excelled. And then it's hard to excel when people are expecting you not to excel. So I don't imagine they got a lot of encouragement. That's my imagination. That's not documented anywhere, but I can't imagine they did, and yet they excelled.
Actually, it is documented.
Okay.
Because they that court martial that I mentioned,
right?
The colonel in charge of that base was openly racist and segregationist, and part of the reason that came about is that they were supposed to have their own officers club, and he diverted the funds somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, don't want to honor you. Not going to, and then we're going to court martial you. And
because this, during the time period, that was completely acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
Now we think of these men and even the folks, anybody who worked on this project at the airbase, any of these folks, these are heroes now. Yes. And we're all kind of awestruck. And yet back then, they didn't get to enjoy any of that adoration that we have now.
No.
So that's pretty sobering, actually.
It is very sobering. It is.
One of the coolest things that I thought, and this is, you have made it in America, when you have an action figure, and they actually have a Tuskegee Airmen action figure. This is so cool.
Wendell, we actually have a question really quick too, from Brandon on YouTube, who asks, how many women were actually involved in the unit?
Can do. One moment here. Now, one of the things that's interesting about the unit is that it wasn't, it was designed to do this test program to see if African Americans, to go see whether or not that trope was true, that they weren't smart enough or had the physical capacity to actually fly a plane. But they also had anyone else who was mixed race or from a different ethnicity. That's where they put them.
Oh, okay.
Interesting. Wow. And I'm guessing, many of the other jobs that were associated with the squadron were probably also, we don't know if they can do these jobs, but we're going to put them here because we don't want, we're segregating and we don't want white people to work with them and all of that. And honestly, I'm just thinking some of this ferocity that we have heard about in the fight that they took to the Germans came from this kind of treatment. I'm sure I would do that if it was me.
Well, and the women that were involved, none were pilots, if I'm not mistaken, because I don't know that there were many female pilots in combat.
Definitely not in combat. Typically, the Wasps flew flights transporting aircraft from place to place within the United States. So they might fly the Sturmans from one base to another as trainers if they needed them, or fly aircrafts from the factories to the air bases to go overseas, things like that. And I always wondered if there were any black women pilots. I was lucky to meet a couple of the Wasps at this same air show, and it was just fascinating. And then I served with one in the Coast Guard Auxiliary who told us all of her stories, so that was really fun.
Yeah.
This is just, I've actually sat in a P-51 Mustang, folks.
Yeah, I was thinking about you.
It's so exciting. I was vibrating in my seat as he's giving these descriptions because it's an amazing airplane. I mean, it just is really amazing. And, its ability to do these dogfights with the Messerschmitts is just, I don't know, I'm just getting, just really amazed. And from the talks that the gentleman gave at this air show, they were giant heroes to the people of France. And they could go anywhere and do anything in France that anybody else could do. They were not segregated at all in France. And then they came home.
And then they came home. So when do we find a few women?
Yeah, we found now that there were quite a few. They don't give any hard and fast numbers, but they give there were quite a few who worked in other capacities. But some of the standouts that were named was there was Sergeant Amelia Jones. She worked for 2 years during World War II with the 99th Pursuit Squadron under Colonel Davis, the commander of the Airmen. And during,
that name sounds very familiar. I don't know. That
does sound like a very.
I don't know why
name,
that sounds so familiar, but I feel like I've heard that name from somewhere before, and I can't.
Talking about the Amelia Jones.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah.
Wow.
But it just rings a bell somewhere, and I can't.
See.
Yeah. I love this promotion. Again, I can't say it enough that we're getting to see these accomplishments through museum visits. Prior to COVID, I had intended to do more museum visits, of course, in person. And once this is behind us, and it will be at some point, I'm back in the museum with Ira. This is just an amazing opportunity, I think, again, to, especially being totally blind, to have a chance to go into a museum. And if you're fortunate to be on a docent-led tour, it's all the better. But if you wander in on your own and you just want to have an afternoon or a morning at the museum, you can do it. and discover all of this information, not only through this museum promotion, but others. And so again, I
Don't-owned
want to
museums, they will
thank
be
you
coming.
guys.
Yeah, the Smithsonian's will be coming back
Yeah.
online very soon. The Smithsonian's are IRA access locations, and we'll be telling you a little bit about how you can access content at the Smithsonian's through online content as well. So that currently is not part of the offer. However, we will be working on that and telling you how you can access that content.
Mhm.
So Stephanie, and I want to thank you. I know Wendell may still be looking up some stuff, but
I know, because
oh
I'm
gosh,
just, I want to just stay online about 6 more hours, but
I
you
know.
guys have other things going
I
on.
know.
Oh,
Wendell he's
Yes,
just
I'm still. I am still here, but quite like I
Maybe
said,
we'll
quite
have
honestly,
to do day at the museum one day.
leave me.
See how that goes.
Oh, yes.
8-hour day.
Left to my own devices, you wouldn't hear from me for quite a while.
fooling around in the background, poring over some Google virtual shots or something of all of this, because he's amazing in finding all of this out. And
yeah,
I so appreciate
kind
you
of
guys.
one of the added gems of the IRA agent being with you is, oh wait, I want to know this factoid. Oh, okay, let's go off and look at that. But Stephanie, we have another museum, and thank you so much to the folks who put together this amazing online experience at the Tuskegee Airmen Museum. But
Yes.
we want to talk about September 25th at 4 p.m. This is when a lot of people, Eastern time, this is when a lot of people have been waiting for. Tell everybody what we're going to do.
Well, in honor of baseball, because I am a fan, so I'm laying down the gauntlet. Dodger fans rock. And so I asked, and Ira answered, we're going to do the Negro Baseball Museum, and details will follow. And I cannot wait as well.
Get excited, baseball fans.
And get excited. Great history. We all perhaps know, or many of us know, about Jackie Robinson and his being the first African American to break the color line barrier in baseball. But there's so much more to that story. So 2 weeks, September 25th, kind of coinciding with the end of this particular 2020 Major League Baseball season. Wanted to put that out there to show we can have fun and learn history at the same time. And so again, I put the challenge out to all of you guys, because Dodgers are going to take World Series this year.
I'm a long-suffering Indians
I'll just say, I don't know if I can
fan,
wait 2 weeks. Like, I'm already excited.
All right. So, yeah, and so much more to go. That'll be the third one of the 6 we have planned, and I'm having a great time with it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. You are a wonderful host. We appreciate you being on board with us. Whoops. Get my microphone in place there. And I want to thank Ryan Bishop, our behind-the-scenes guy. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan.
No, thank you, everybody. I really do enjoy these and getting to experience just all the history and all the just the amazing events that came through it. Love museums, just absolutely do. So
I'm
thank
still
everyone for
picturing
joining live stream as well too.
Absolutely, and I am still picturing the wonderful, verbal pictures that Wendell painted of some of those.
The banking.
I love it. I was vibrant. I was so excited. I'm like, yeah.
Couldn't have picked a better agent for this one too. You
got it.
Really, just you couldn't have picked a better agent.
You got it. So, so hopefully everybody will be able to join us. Now, this particular episode will also be up on the podcast feed very soon, and it will be here on YouTube. Ryan is going to create a playlist for our afternoons at the museum, and so you can catch all of those on a YouTube playlist. Wonderful. Thank you all. If you'd like more information about IRA, the visual interpreting service, you can go to www.ira.io, and that will tell you all about who we are, what we do, and how we do it with our wonderfully trained agents. And who we serve, and it's not just blind and low vision people. If you need a little bit of help accessing things, you saw what Wendell was able to do. Maybe you're not totally blind, maybe you're not legally blind yet, but you'd like a little bit of extra support in accessing things on the computer, etc. You saw what Wendell can do. We've got many other agents that do an excellent job at this. Thank you so much. We will see you on the 25th of September. This has been Janine Stanley for Afternoon at the Museum with Ira.